If you ever thought we couldn't meme something into existence here on the Actual Justice Warrior channel, get a load of the Majority Report guy, Matt Leach, going off on how upset he is about how I am Anna Kasparian's favorite charlatan on the internet.com.
Look, the rise in crime, it was very clear, like it was for the reasons we said and not the George Floyd effect, like Anna's favorite charlatan likes to point out. It was clearly because of the material pressures put on people because of the pandemic, like Anna's favorite charlatan likes to point out.
Again, you crack a joke enough times and these idiots over on the left actually believe it. And for those of you who are thinking that he's not referring to me, remember this guy is absolutely outraged that I called the George Floyd effect the George Floyd effect. He assumes that I made up the term, even though again, it is just the Ferguson effect repurposed for George Floyd. But the thing is, if he knew anything about criminal justice, they would have never produced this segment because they think it debunks the right-wing crime narrative. However, each and every example that they give throughout the course of this video is either 100% wrong or ass backwards, or an example of what I said repeatedly is the solution to criminality. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
So the Majority Report decided to publish a segment entitled Right-Wing Crime Narrative Falls Apart with the New Data. And of course, they're doing the trick that we always talk about on this channel, where they highlight some preliminary data. They say, look, crime down. They don't give it to you in the context of, overall crime as compared to 2019, even though this guy later on is going to cry about me saying George Floyd effect, because once again, we are in the same exact scenario where we have to respond to the allegation that crime is down, and we're lying about crime by saying down compared to what? Down compared to what? Are you saying it's down compared to the previous year because it could still be elevated over a now 5 to 6 year period, again compared to 2019? But of course, the folks at the Majority Report, they don't participate in an actual genuine honest conversation or discussion on the topic. They do propaganda, and we here at the Actual Justice Warrior channel call that nonsense out every single time, especially when these cowards dare to go after me without mentioning my name, and of course try to use me as a guilt by association or guilt by affiliation for Anna Kasparian, who Emma is currently in a battle with right now on the internet.com. And make no mistake about it, I will prove once again throughout the course of the segment that the Majority Report does not understand the data that they're referencing. They are in full denial of crime. Their theories on crime are absolutely stupid, and the reason for that is because they are genuinely lacking in intelligence, and of course they participate in luxury beliefs. It costs these people absolutely nothing to pretend away crime, because guess what? There's no way, shape, or form they would be caught in the neighborhoods that are afflicted by this crime.
Has been, since the pandemic, a concerted effort by right-wing media, but also by our social media platforms that elevate content that causes angry reactions or fury. We've seen this when, Facebook has opened up its books, and that's why they put political content does so well on those platforms, which they deprioritize in the 6 months leading up to the election. By the way, they said, we're not going to do political content anymore. It makes people too upset, even though that goes against their engagement models, because they wanted Donald Trump to win.
So right off the top, I just want to point out something, which is Emma is completely wrong about what she's saying related to the social media engagement models and how this was proof positive that they wanted the evil orange man to win. Make no mistake about it, Facebook deprioritized news after Trump won the 2016 election. The reason they did that was because of pressure from the left wing, because they said all the information on social media leads to the evil orange man to have a victory. And this policy continued up until after the 2024 election. And what Emma is going to say later on is going to prove that clearly and obviously this was done to not aid the evil orange man in his election victory.
And one of the biggest indicators for in exit polling of whether or not you voted for Donald Trump was if you consume little to no political news or you consume it mostly on social media. And they got their wish. And now they've throttled political content back up because they got their guy, but we want the engagement back.
No, it takes a very special lack of awareness and lack of intelligence to have your end point of your sentence completely contradict the idea put forward in the beginning of your sentence. So according to Emma, in the end, the biggest indicator that somebody would have voted for Trump is if they don't engage with political news or political media, or get all of their political news or most of their political news through social media. However, she said that they deranked news content on these social media platforms in the lead up to the election in order to help the evil orange man win the election. But if people who see more of Trump on social media are more likely to vote for him, how could deprioritizing news, deprioritizing Trump content prior to the election help them win the election? That doesn't make any sense. That is a contradiction among many stupid contradictions that you're going to see throughout the course of the video. But I just want you to know that the groundwork, the foundation of this particular video is wrong, stupid, not even close. Thanks for playing it. Please go home. Get off of my screen because you don't know anything.
So much of it is like at the beginning of your feed. Race war fight. Like, look at how scary the subway is. Watch this.
Here's a grandma getting beat up by non-white teenagers.
Right.
Yeah, it's like verified fight accounts, and all of the replies are either like other viral clips.
So look, because I am the fairest online content creator on the internet.com, I will point out that a lot of people do post rage bait videos on social media. Sometimes they recycle old videos of black people attacking white people, when in reality, in actuality, what we see time and time again through the data is that black people are overwhelmingly attacking other black people. In addition to that, I will also point out that this is obviously true. People like Emma Vigeland tend to highlight stories, and by the way, because white on black crimes are so rare, of white people getting into arguments with black people and pretending that those are national issues. Again, we have a very famous clip of her defaming a 36-year-old pregnant physician's assistant as a drunk racist that walked up to 4 black teenagers in order to steal their bike, and never once producing a retraction that actually pointed out that she had the bike on her account. On the video, you can see them forcing her bike into the terminal and taking it from her.
I mean, I ride city bikes, which is clearly what they're using there, and it's not that hard to figure out. If you're doing it on the app, it'll say which bike and which. It'll have a label at the docking station for which bike she's in reference, or they're both referencing. So honestly, it should have been pretty clear to her, but she's in work clothes. So my first thought was, is she drunk? Like, is she, I don't know, but she just seemed really out of it. And she's straight up racist, totally. But there was like, she wasn't really making a ton of sense, which was bizarre. And they were like, this is my bike. Just go to the other bike stand, the little docking station, and get your own. It's not that difficult. But yeah, I mean, the white woman fake crying thing, I could do it too, but and then you just turn it off.
So yes, while it is 100% true that people will recycle videos of black people attacking white people on social media for engagement, looking at you, Ian Miles Chung, the fact of the matter is Emma Vigeland and the folks over at the Majority Report, their ilk, they will take rarer instances, sometimes just basic arguments, sometimes arguments where the white person actually has Down syndrome or developmental disability, like the Victoria's Secret Karen video, and they will use those false videos to portray a narrative of broad black victimization at the hands of evil white racists, because of course the supply of racism is nowhere near the demand needed for them to push their agenda. So they do the same thing, except when they do it, it's rarer or sometimes just more outwardly false, and it's absolutely disgusting.
I also think the elevation of a lot of true crime, which the victims are almost always white, 95% of the time white women, that is like a part of, a lot of this mass media consumption, has made people extremely fearful.
Now, also, Emma then dumbly says, oh, well, I think true crime has a lot to do with it because most of the victims in true crime stories are white women. And honestly, Emma, like, again, you're just contradict everything that you say with the very next sentence, and it's ridiculous. The reason why they highlight a lot of cases where white people are the victims is because you are very likely to get a white perpetrator in those instances. We can look at the representation of criminals on shows like Law and Order and all these other different various cop shows. And guess what? It is nowhere near the normal representation of black criminals. And this is done intentionally by the word of the producers of these shows in order to not have people make racist assumptions about crime. So we get an unrealistic picture from mass media in order to cover up for black crime. And Emma is saying that this is somehow making the white women, because you have to go after the whites all the time, that's somehow making them crazy about criminality. Again, just no coherent thoughts coming from this woman at any point in time, but what do you expect? This is the spoiled brat progressive who likes to flex these luxury beliefs at social parties in order to maintain her social status, and white people bad still flies in these champagne socialist circles.
And there were many claims made by centrist media sources, by right-wing media sources, by purportedly left-wing media sources that all this data is lying to you and crime is going through the roof. Well, we now have data on 2024. We have talked about how crime went down in 2023 after our once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. There was a spike, but crime has been on the decline for decades and decades, and now that trend continues into the first data that we have from 2024. Homicides dropped 16% according to the preliminary data that we're seeing in 2024. Stats compiled by the Major Cities Chiefs Association suggest that the COVID-era crime wave was all but evaporated during President Biden's final year in office. Even as Donald Trump claims that crime was rising, became a key part of his winning election strategy. Violent crime, especially homicides, rose during Biden's first 2 years as president before dropping dramatically in the next 2 years, the MCCA data show. An Axios analysis of the preliminary crime data for 2024 from 69 self-reporting large police departments found that violent crimes decreased overall by 6%, robberies 9%, rape 6%, aggravated assault 5%, all declined, an Axios analysis found. Many cities had significantly larger declines in homicides. They dropped 35% in Boston and New Orleans, 26% in Cleveland and Dallas.
So again, right here we have the preliminary data from the year 2024, and I will always point out how people over at the Majority Report love to highlight this preliminary data because it's incomplete, and of course, they will never address the changes in the data later on. And by the way, one of the things that I find to be absolutely hilarious is that Axios talks about the increase in crime under Biden's first 2 years in office, which would be 21 and 2022. But the fact of the matter is, when the initial preliminary data came out for the year 2022, they were actually showing a decline in crime. In fact, after the debate that President Trump had with Kamala Harris, so we're talking late into the election cycle, that is when the FBI quietly revised their numbers from 2022. And this is not surprising because, as we talked about on this channel multiple different times, because I try to give you guys the full breadth of information, the FBI transitioned from the old reporting system in the Uniform Crime Report, which was based on the SRS, the Summary Reporting System, to the new system, which was based on the National Incident Based Reporting System. And when you make a transition in your data models, anomalies are to be expected, but the Majority Report never informs you of this. The Majority Report never highlights this article from the Council on Criminal Justice, which, by the way, is an organization that pushes for criminal justice reform, that shows that when they made this transition from the SRS to the National Incident-Based Reporting System, we saw a greater divergence in these two reports, the Uniform Crime Report and the National Crime Victimization Survey, than we had seen in decades, which would indicate that there was something off in the new methodology of the Uniform Crime Report, which would obviously indicate we were very likely to see revisions, which we ended up seeing again late last year, 2 years removed from the year 2022. But let's be clear, Emma and the folks at the Majority Report denied the crime increase in 2020, denied the crime increase in 2021, denied the crime increase in 2022. They did so so for 2023, and now they're using preliminary data in order to do so for 2024. And by the way, the unrevised 2023 FBI Uniform Crime Report data did show a drop in crime for the year 2023, but I will wait until that gets revised later on because again, we have a new reporting system and we are expecting some revisions to come out later, just like what happened in the 2022 system. In addition to that, we also look to the National Crime Victimization Surveys, and the victimization surveys are showing still an uptick in certain crimes, obviously not in homicides because people who are the victims of homicides are really bad at filling out surveys, but this is your little recap of the data and why they consistently get this wrong. And of course, they don't tell you down compared to what. What are we comparing the crime to?
34% in Philadelphia, 32% in Washington, D.C. Philadelphia, I thought that was being run by the pro-crime Larry Krasner.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So look, I can highlight any of these cities of my choosing, but because Emma Vigeland decided that she was going to go out and say, oh, what about Philadelphia? I thought that was being run by pro-crime Larry Krasner, as if to dismiss the idea that crime went up significantly under Larry Krasner's watch, and as if to pretend away the actual reason why crime, and specifically homicides, fell in the city of Philadelphia. But first, let's get a little bit of an overview. That prior to Krasner in 2016, Philadelphia suffered 277 homicides. After his first year, it was up to 315, then 353, then 356, then 499 in 2020, then 562 in 2021, 516 in 2022, 410 in again 2023. So let's be clear, for every single year that Larry Krasner was in office, from 2017 all the way to 2023, we saw great jumps in homicide from the years prior to Krasner being in office, although after it hit its peak in 2022, we did see a reduction, but again, that reduction was after a dramatic increase. Now we go to 2024, where we actually see a genuine reduction. And by the way, these numbers are as low as we saw in 2014, which is a full 3 years before Larry Krasner took office, so let us give credit where credit is due. So as you can see right here, for the year 2024, Philadelphia got all the way back down to 269 homicides. Again, this is on par with 2 years before Larry Krasner was in office, when they had 249 homicides that very year. Excellent work. But I think an interesting question would be, credit for what? Did they increase progressive welfare to the criminals in the state of Pennsylvania, in the city of Philadelphia, and therefore that reduced homicides by such a dramatic point from 2023's elevated levels to 2024's low levels, even in comparison to the last decade in the city of Philadelphia? Or were there some policy changes at Krasner's district attorney's office, at the statewide level, at the citywide level, that ultimately ended up leading to these reductions? I mean, if only there was a way for us to look at this, and it turns out not only did the state of Pennsylvania pass a series of crime bills cracking down on retail theft, porch pirates, and all sorts of minor crimes, but Larry Krasner had his come to Jesus moment, and he decided that he was going to do a new strategy when it came to gun crimes, and stop me if you've heard this one before, as a good solution to reduce criminality. Headline: Philadelphia moves to crack down on repeat gun offenders before they fire their weapons. District Attorney Larry Krasner launched the Prolific Gun Offenders Unit to focus on winning convictions and stiffer penalties for armed robbers, straw purchasers, and ghost gun distributors. The harrowing home invasion and gunpoint robbery of Otis Ryan suffered last summer didn't initially make the news in Philadelphia, likely because no one died or was injured. No gunshots were fired. Still, when Ryan's 30 speaks of the incident, his voice fills with emotion. He fought back tears at the August 15th news conference where Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner announced that Marquise Alexander, Ryan's attacker, had been convicted. Ryan's and Alexander had been co-workers. The crime, Ryan said, traumatized him. Krasner described Alexander as a, quote, man who just cannot stop robbing people. He just cannot stop robbing them with guns. He's the type of criminal defender who inspired Krasner to start Philadelphia's first ever Prolific Gun Defenders Unit. Krasner launched the unit this April with $800,000 from the Philadelphia City Council. The unit's mission: prosecuting repeat violent gun offenders with prior arrests or felony convictions. The lawyers find them when they face new charges charges for robberies, straw purchasing firearms, manufacturing and distributing ghost guns, and other gun-related crimes. In other words, people who are wanted for crimes involving guns that are specifically not homicides. Just think about how dumb you have to be a contributor on the Majority Report to say, oh, well, I thought Larry Krasner was this soft-on-crime prosecutor, not realizing that from the moment he took office, homicide rose dramatically until it hit its all-time peak in terms of raw numbers, and then started to fall only after Larry Krasner started prosecuting repeat offenders and pushing for harsher sentences. And by the way, if you look at the quotes from Krasner in relation to this unit, it's almost as if I said them myself. The idea behind the new unit, Krasner said, is that a relatively small number of people commit many of the city's gun crimes. Quote, it doesn't take a whole lot of people to do a whole lot of crime, he said. Quote, for people who are legally possessing firearms and doing it repeatedly, you're looking at a very dangerous population, and we have to dig in on that small number of people. Again, this is Larry Krasner, the Soros DA, having that come to Jesus moment. This is Larry Krasner, the I don't want to prosecute anyone for anything. I'm a public defender. I'm going to start my time in office by busting up the prosecution units that exist, that were working, have horrible results, and then backpedal on that and start targeting the repeat offenders. And by the way, I brought up to Emma's face targeting repeat offenders that commit the same crime over and over and over again. And Emma said, those are the most desperate people. You need to give them even bigger breaks.
And the reason it worked is because the philosophy behind mass incarceration is pretty simple. What you're trying to do is incapacitate criminals because the same criminals are often reoffending. You brought up shoplifting earlier. You can actually pull up an article to find out that the same 300 people in New York City represent a third of the shoplifting arrests total for a single year.
Probably because
This
they're
is because they're
incredibly
repeat
impoverished and they need to find a way to actually sustain their livelihoods in this country.
That's put a very good way. That's phrased very well, to maintain their livelihoods.
Well, so, no, I mean, no, their life is a better way to maintain.
Sure. But like, I guess my point is, some of them certainly are desperate. But when you see videos of a guy like shoveling stuff into a garbage bag, that's not desperation.
But again, this is what you do, Tim. You return to anecdotal examples when I'm trying to talk about.
We're talking about just the 300 people.
And I am talking
which is the anecdotal evidence.
What 300 people?
He said the same 300 people, the ones committing the crime. I said, right.
Third of the shoplifting arrests in New York
These specific
City.
individuals are doing it for profit.
Okay, so we should have a system of mass incarceration because there are 300.
I didn't say that.
Because I'm talking to you now. There are 300 repeat offenders.
No, we should incapacitate repeat offenders so they stop offending.
So for this dopey, spoiled brat to flex her luxury beliefs that progressive prosecutions work, when in reality, the exact opposite of everything she advocated for, and by the way, what I did advocate for to her face, is actually what drove down gun violence and homicide in the city of Philadelphia, is embarrassing. It should be humiliating. She should be laughed off the internet for being this bad at her job. But again, these people operate in the most superficial way when they come into contact with these issues. Emma Vigeland and all the folks over at the Majority Report actually genuinely believe that criminals are innocent Beba Angel Aladdins who didn't do nothing wrong, who just need more slaps on the wrist. And guess what? The result of that was surging homicides for 6 years in the city of Philadelphia. The result of just 1 year of trying my approach, 1 year of prosecuting just the serial repeat offenders, just the people who offend time and time again, was that they prevented over half the murders of the peak that Larry Krasner presided over. It's absolutely crazy how if you say, hey, wait a minute, if somebody is repeating crimes over and over again with firearms, then maybe, just maybe, at one point in time, they're likely to pull the trigger on that firearm, and that might lead to somebody dying. Obviously, my position is crazy and illogical according to Emma Vigeland, but to anybody who has any semblance of rational reason or, sentience, it's obviously that's the case. That's the solution. That's what solved it. But why look into it if you're the Majority Report and you just want to say progressive prosecutor good, even when they do the exact opposite of what you advocated for years?
34% in Philadelphia, 32% in Washington, D.C.
Now, look, I know I spent a lot of time talking about the city of Philadelphia and giving Larry Krasner credit for finally figuring out that prosecuting repeat offenders works, but I also want to highlight D.C. because this is the exact thing that I've called Emma Vigeland out to her face time and time again.
And
Crime is down in New York City in 2023,
and
by every metric.
Down compared to what?
Down compared to 2021 and
But don't
2022.
change the subject,
no,
right?
No,
You
I'm
accused
not.
us of publishing videos we
wait a
don't
minute.
publish.
If it's down in compared to 2021, and there was a giant year-over-year increase from 2020 to 2021, then you're talking about something that's
It wasn't
down.
giant. It was a small bump from the
A
pandemic.
47% increase in homicide
a
in the city of New
small
York is not a small bump.
It was homicides have been on a precipitous decline since the 70s, since the 80s, since the 90s. There was a bump because of desperation in the pandemic, and now it's back down in 2023.
So,
that's irrefutable. That's the NYPD's own data. That's on all major crimes: murders, rapes, grand larcenies, robberies.
This is an argument I'm often confronted with, and it's actually pretty terrible. So crime is down from the peak, for sure, right? In some years in New York City, we had 2,100 murders. I think that's the largest ever in the history of the city of New York. However, my standard it's not as bad as the worst time in the history of the city of New York. When I see murders jump year over year from about 319 to 469.
What do you mean year over year? The 2 years that I just
year
listed?
over year, as in from 2020 to 2021. That would be a year over year increase. That is a dramatic increase, and it's the largest since, I believe, 2010. The greatest year over year increase of all time in the city of New York, by the way. But it's all the way back to 2010 numbers.
It's down again.
It's down compared to the increase, but it's not down compared to 2019.
Which is, of course, being incredibly misleading in terms of the crime stats when she says down 32%, because again, the question should always be down compared to what? Down compared to what? Again, remember that question, because if you look at the DC crime data, what you will find out is that yes, homicide is down 32%. That is absolutely wonderful. In 2023, we had 274 murders in our nation's capital, and that reduced to 187. Now, this is absolutely great news, but it needs to be understood by everybody out there in the audience that 274 number from the year before was extremely elevated. It was a dramatic jump because in the District of Columbia, they passed a lot of their woke criminal justice reforms going into 2023, and that's why crime was so elevated in that year. More so even than, by the way, post George Floyd, even though it is still up compared to the pre-George Floyd era. Again, roll back the data a little bit and understand the context in which we're functioning. So as you can see, we have the 187 homicides in 2024. In 2023, we had 274, which was a dramatic jump from 2022's 203. And again, that was a slight drop from 2021, which had 226. 2020, the year of George Floyd, 198. 2019, we had 166. Now again, remember the premise of what Emma Vigeland and these dopes at the Majority Report are trying to tell you. They're trying to say that the George Floyd effect, not a thing. It was just the pandemic effect. And guess what? As economic conditions have improved, the pandemic crime wave has evaporated. But as you can see right there, homicide in the District of Columbia is still up compared to the pre-George Floyd, pre-pandemic levels. And again, if it was the pandemic that was causing the crime spike in the District of Columbia, they have to explain to me why the pandemic crime spike disproportionately increased it to the highest year in 2023 rather than in 2020 or 2021 like we saw in other parts of the country. It's almost as if these people have no idea what they're talking about, and while I'm willing to show you any data set, go over it, explain it to you in detail, these people are not. They'll just pull up an article with preliminary data, say it confirms my narrative, and then try to shuffle along like it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. You're lying to people, you're lying to your own audience, and it's embarrassing, and I trip you up on the same exact stuff in every one of my responses. These people just look for data points, little factoids, in order to pretend that they're right without ever diving that deep into it. And by the way, we talked about the Freddie Gray effect in the city of Baltimore, just so you can understand the impact that these reforms can have on the police department and Marilyn Mosby's department as compared to Ivan Bates, who succeeded her, and just like Larry Krasner, decided that he was going to crack down on repeat offenders, specifically repeat offenders that engage in crimes with firearms. And what did we see? Elevated homicides every year Marilyn Mosby was in office, and as soon as Ivan Bates came in with a harsh on crime approach, we see a drop in homicides homicides back to still very bad levels because it's the city of Baltimore, but lower and more in line with what you could expect from that particular city. Just look at the data for yourself. Woke prosecutor comes in 2015, Marilyn Mosby runs on getting as many people out of prison as possible, cheers on the Black Lives Matter riots that are tearing up her city. She stays in office until the end of 2022, but as soon as the clock hits 2023, all of a sudden, this very stable, pandemic-resistant rise in homicides that we saw throughout her whole tenure turns around, goes in the complete other direction. When he decides to actually go after the criminal rather than pretend they're Aladdin, crime drops dramatically. So yeah, Emma, Matt, the other guy who doesn't appear on camera, and the guy that's in the split screen with you that's not Sam Cedar, you're all dopes. You're all fools. You want to call me out? You want to say that I don't look into the data, that I don't know what I'm talking about, that I just look for factoids and little isolated incidents in order to prove my narrative? When guess what? The data supports me. I'm perfectly fine to dig into it and throw it in your faces every single day, every single time we can do this, because you don't get it.
The data does not include New York City. But the data that they have released says that crime has been declining. So perhaps that will cut into this percentage.
So Emma says that this data set does not include New York City, but their data is showing that it's declining. Now, of course, she's highlighting homicides for all the cities that she highlighted right there. So I'm just going to pull up the homicide data. Anybody can do this. It's actually available even on Wikipedia of all places, although the NYPD keeps very detailed statistics, and I recommend going there because they update them probably more frequently. But we'll just go from 2019 all the way to 2024 so you could see that the same thing that I've been pointing out time and time again holds true, which is down compared to what? The question they will never answer is down compared to what? So in 2019, we had 319 murders. Then we saw the 47% year-over-year increase, which brought us to 468 murders. And then in 2021, we saw another increase to 488 murders. Then in 2022, we saw a decline to 438, 2023, 391. And in 2024, New York had 377 homicides, still up, still elevated from before 2019. Now again, if these dopes were actually trying to refute, dispute, or go against my points about criminal justice reforms being instituted in 2020 that had an impact on New York City, you would think when they say crime is down, they would mean crime down compared to 2019. But of course, they can't mean that because crime is still elevated compared to 2019, which is something that they refuse to address. And by the way, we see the same tricks in terms of subway crime in the city of New York, but a little bit of a different blend where it turns out that property crimes are down in the subway, but rape, homicide, assault, and a bunch of other serious crimes that are not property crimes, not the crimes of poverty that we're told about by these people, are actually up. So you end up with a 12% decline, even though it's elevated in most of the major categories. Again, when we're talking about major city police departments, they tend to keep pretty good stats. You can pull this stuff up on your own, see it for yourself, verify what I'm saying is true, or you could be like the Majority Report and just report a nebulous downtrend of a percentage year over year and pretend like we're still not elevated since the George Floyd incident. We're still not elevated in New York since statewide bail reform.
But I also want to point out data from 2023 because this would be consistent with that. This is the FBI's more complete data that we have on 2023, the previous year. Violent crime in the U.S. dropped in 2023, according to FBI statistics that showed a continued trend downward after a coronavirus pandemic-era crime spike. Overall, violent crime declined an estimated 3% in 2023 from the year before.
Now, Emma then jumps to the 2023 data because she says that's more complete data, but I will point out that the 2022 data showed a crime drop of about 2%. It was revised upwards 6%, so we saw an increase of 4% for 2022, and this should not be surprising to happen again in terms of the 2023 data, because the same methodology and the same issues that existed when they did the switchover that I explained earlier in this video are also applicable to the 2023 data. But as of right now, totally fine to accept that nationwide crime dropped slightly in the year 2023. I will just point out that we just saw a revision and the National Crime Victimization Survey shows contradicting information. But again, to be fair, Emma and the whole Majority Report crew are willfully ignorant of all those facts, so I don't blame them too much for highlighting the 2023 data.
This has been a complete, utter lie from the beginning. that has been used to justify things like this. I know I'm going on for a while, but the White House put out this damn disgusting ASMR thing, mainstreaming the shackling of tens of thousands of people who are immigrants.
So then we get into the emotionalism of this, which is, oh my God, their misconstruing of the data is used to justify things like this. And we get a cut to the Trump administration showing illegal migrants being deported from the country, which of course leads Emma to say they committed no crime except for crossing the border illegally. That crime they committed.
And we now know from the data that it's a majority non-criminals, but they're counting anybody that crossed the border without documentation. But even Dreamers, which is a legal program, as criminals. This is what the official White House account under Donald Trump posted yesterday.
And again, I will point out that the Trump administration right now is targeting people that have deportation orders or have been convicted of serious violent crimes. That's who's being targeted right now. There's 1.4 million people with active deportation orders. Those people gotta go. They've already been adjudicated to be not bueno for the United States of America. So yeah, you cry me a river for the literal non-citizens as you support the constant crime and victimization and cover up for the criminals of your fellow Americans.
The truth is that the people who are actually lying and misrepresenting the crime story in America are the people who are pointing towards blue state and like blue mayors, like the Young Turks, when the real truth is, and the people who give a about crime and people getting ground up in this country, the truth is that Missouri, even excluding Kansas City, has higher violent crime rates than New York City. Why is it that people have no idea about that?
So I love it when lefties who don't know anything about crime, who don't know anything about the subject matter, try to virtue signal this hard and clearly just express their ignorance. So Matt Leach said, oh, well, if you exclude Kansas City, Missouri still has a higher rate of violent crime than New York City. And again, you can exclude Kansas City, which is pretty bad, it has pretty high crime rates. It has some big issues, Democrat-run city. But the real issue in the state of Missouri is the city of St. Louis, which is the murder capital of the country. If Matt Leach would have known that, he might have said exclude Kansas City and then St. Louis. But the fact of the matter is, we don't even know if that would actually drop the crime levels to the point where he's trying to make this argument. So yeah, St. Louis is the worst city in the United States of America. And I want to make something clear. New York City is one of the safest big cities, even right now, even with the elevated crime in the entire country. However, what we do on this channel, and I say this time and time again, because we're interested in an honest conversation, we actually go over the data, is explain to you that New York is bad in comparison to recent years of New York history. Crime has gotten worse for sure, but obviously it's nowhere near as bad as Chicago, which is nowhere near as bad as Baltimore, which isn't as bad as the city of St. Louis, although Baltimore, Detroit, and of course the city of St. Louis would trade that top spot for number one in homicides. For the last decade, it's not unusual to see any one of them at the top of that list. So yeah, we understand contextually that New York isn't as bad as St. Louis, another blue city that had an elected Democratic prosecutor that, by the way, even though it's still number one in homicide, saw a drop in homicide the year that the governor removed that prosecutor, Kim Gardner. But Matty over here is interested in virtue signaling rather than, actually being accurate about the places that he talks about. So who can expect him to know all of this just because he's pretending like he does on a show?
Look, the rise in crime, it was very clear, like it was for the reasons we said and not the George Floyd effect, like Anna's favorite charlatan likes to point out. It was clearly because of the material pressures put on people because of the pandemic.
No, not even close, Matt. Not even close. It's not because of the material pressures of the pandemic. Again, these people never address the fact that crime went down during the Great Recession. So if it's just economic factors, then why would we see crime go down? And by the way, property crimes also dropped there. But we saw a dramatic spike after the George Floyd incident, directly after the George Floyd incident, because make no mistake about it, crime was falling at the beginning of the pandemic, not rising. And this was due to the fact that you guys got your way. You cut the police. You reduced their numbers. We went in your direction in terms of woke criminal justice reform. And guess what? It backfired. And every time you point to a gain in a specific city, guess what? There's a policy that's more aligned with me than you. That is the cause of that. You're embarrassing. You're an absolute fool. And you can be offended by the George Floyd effect all you want. But the fact of the matter is, you've tried time and time again again to cry your way out of it, only to get smacked back into place by me because you got no counter arguments. All you have is virtue signaling disguised as logic and some swear words to show how much of a tough guy you are. Again, this is a monthly homicide chart that shows you the normal trend of spikes in the summer and drops in the winter every year up until you get not to the pandemic, which is marked off with the transparent red cover, but up until you get to this red line. This red line shows the break with what was previously normal. And guess what? This red line corresponds to the last week of the month of May in 2020 when George Floyd died. That's why it's called the George Floyd effect, because it's not due to the pandemic, it's due to the unrest, anti-police sentiment, and all of the consequences of the Black Lives Matter movement becoming re-emergent in the year of 2020. Matt, Emma, I need you guys to understand this. You hold the beliefs of the progressive elite. That's who you are. Just deal with it. Us in the real world that actually have to engage in these neighborhoods with the consequences of the policies that you advocate for, do not support them. These are your luxury beliefs. That is just a fact. That is just reality. So stop crying about it and stop crying about Anna Kasparian actually being correct and not falling in line with your stupid propaganda. Now look guys, that's all I really have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the Majority Report, not understanding anything in terms of criminality, and who's surprised by that? No one. Till next time.